I met him at a time in my life when I was exhausted by noise. Not the kind you hear with your ears, the kind that lives inside you after too many explanations, too many raised voices, too many nights where love felt like a performance you had to survive. I wanted something quieter, something that didn't require constant defense. He arrived like relief. He spoke softly. He waited before answering. He looked at me when I talked, really looked, like each word mattered. After years of being interrupted, talked over, dismissed as too much, his attention felt like oxygen. He remembered things I forgot I had said. My favorite tea, the song I listened to when I couldn't sleep, the scar on my knee from when I was 9. That kind of attention feels like devotion when you're starved for it. People told me I was lucky. He's so calm. He's grounded. He's emotionally mature. I believed them. I wanted to believe them. In the beginning, nothing felt wrong. There were no red flags waving dramatically in the wind, no shouting, no jealousy that looked like jealousy, no ultimatums, just concern, just care, just a steady hand guiding me away from the chaos I said I was tired of. When I stayed out late, he didn't accuse me. He sighed. "I worry about you," he said, eyes full of something that looked like tenderness. "The world isn't gentle with women like you." When I laughed too loudly at a party, he smiled afterward and said, "You don't need to perform. You're more beautiful when you're natural." When I wore something revealing, he never criticized it directly. He complimented me first, then added almost thoughtfully, "I just hope people don't get the wrong idea. You deserve respect." He never told me no. He just taught me which version of myself earned warmth and which earned distance. That's how it starts. Not with control, but with calibration. I began adjusting without realizing I was doing it. Replying faster so he wouldn't worry. Explaining plans before he asked. Softening jokes that might be misunderstood. Choosing outfits that wouldn't invite commentary. Each change felt small, reasonable, mature. I told myself this was what compromise looked like. I didn't notice how often I apologized until it became my default tone. "Sorry, I did mean it like that. Sorry, I'm probably overthinking. Sorry, you're right." He never asked me to apologize. He just went quiet when I didn't. His silence was never angry, it was wounded. He would withdraw just enough to make me reach for him. His affection became conditional, not overtly, not cruelly, but precisely. When I agreed with him, he was warm, present, proud of me in a way that made my chest swell. When I disagreed, he became distant, polite, cold. I learned quickly which version of myself brought him closer. The scariest part was that I still felt like I was choosing. No one was forcing me, I was volunteering. Over time, I stopped posting photos. "Strangers don't need access to you," he said gently. I stopped arguing. He always sounded so calm, so logical, that by the end of every disagreement, I felt hysterical for having feelings at all. I stopped trusting my reactions. If something hurt me, I wondered if I was being dramatic. If I felt uneasy, I questioned whether it was my trauma talking. If I felt angry, I swallowed it. Anger didn't suit the version of me he loved. Friends noticed before I did. "You seem quieter," one said. "Is everything okay?" another asked. They didn't say it accusingly, they said it carefully. I defended him every time. "He's just protective. He's different from what I'm used to. He makes me feel safe." I didn't realize how often I used the word safe to describe a place where I was slowly disappearing. He started helping me make decisions, not commanding, advising. Which job offers were worth considering? Which friends were a bad influence? Which conversations weren't productive? You get overwhelmed easily, he'd say, almost apologetically. I'm just trying to make things easier for you. And it worked. The less I decided, the calmer everything felt. The less I spoke, the smoother our days went. The less I questioned, the more affection I received. Silence became efficient. I didn't notice when my thoughts stopped feeling like mine. Before speaking, I'd imagine his reaction, the pause, the subtle disappointment, the withdrawal, and edit myself accordingly. My opinions softened, my voice lowered. My personality shrank into something agreeable and small. I told myself this was growth. That's what people say when they lose themselves quietly. The first moment that truly unsettled me came at night. I woke up and felt watched. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, just looking at me. Not touching, not moving. He didn't startle when I stirred. I like you best like this, he said softly. When you're not thinking. I laughed, half asleep, nervous, made a joke out of it. But something about the way he said it, and not playful, not joking, stayed with me. After that, he began commenting on my sleep, suggesting earlier bedtimes, encouraging late nights when he wanted me pliable, framing exhaustion as care. You're calmer when you're tired, he said once, like it was an observation, not a preference. Arguments stopped entirely, not because we resolved them, but because I no longer initiated them. It was easier not to. Easier to let things pass, easier to nod, easier to agree. I was easier to manage when I was drained. One afternoon, while he was at work, I sat alone in the apartment. The silence felt different without him in it, louder. I tried to remember the last decision I had made without imagining his approval first. What to eat, what to wear, who to text, what to feel. I couldn't remember. That realization hit harder than any insult ever could. I understood then that nothing about this relationship had been loud enough to notice. But everything about it had been precise. He didn't want to hurt me. He wanted to shape me. I left while he was gone. No note. No explanation. Not because I didn't have things to say, but because I was afraid that if I heard his voice again, I would stay. Weeks later, he sent one message. You were perfect when you stopped resisting. I still hear him sometimes, not as a voice, but as an instinct. Second-guessing myself, hesitating before speaking, apologizing for existing. Some relationships don't leave bruises, they leave silence where your voice used to be. And learning to speak again feels like learning to breathe after years underwater. Slow, uncertain, but necessary. People like to talk about toxic partners as if they're obvious, as if they arrive screaming, breaking things, slamming doors, announcing themselves with red flags so bright you'd have to be blind to miss them. That wasn't her. If anything, she was subtle, elegant, controlled. She didn't yell, she didn't insult me, she didn't cheat. She didn't demand access to my phone or question where I was every minute of the day. She understood me. That's what made her dangerous. From the very beginning, it felt uncanny. The good kind, I thought at the time. She finished my sentences before I realized where I was going, anticipated my moods with unsettling precision. When I was quiet, she softened to When I was anxious, she grounded me. When I was confident, she admired me just enough to keep me open. It felt like destiny, like finding someone who spoke the same internal language. Friends called it chemistry. I called it, finally, being seen. What I didn't notice or didn't want to notice was how often she corrected me. Casually, lightly, almost playfully. "That's not how it happened," she'd say, smiling. "You're remembering it wrong." At first it was harmless stuff. Who texted who first? Which restaurant we went to? How a conversation ended? I laughed it off. Everyone misremembers sometimes. But then it happened during arguments. I'd bring up something she said and something that hurt, and she'd tilt her head, genuinely puzzled. "I never said that." Why would I say something like that? She never sounded defensive, she sounded worried. "You've been under a lot of stress lately," she'd add gently. "I think it's affecting how you remember things." I didn't argue. I trusted her more than myself. The corrections became more frequent. She'd insist I had agreed to plans I had no memory of agreeing to. She'd claim I'd promised things I was sure I hadn't. When I pushed back, she didn't escalate, she softened. That was her weapon. "I'm not blaming you," she'd say. "I'm just concerned." Concern feels a lot like love when you're vulnerable. Soon I started checking myself before speaking. Am I sure that's what happened? Did I misunderstand? Maybe she's right. I started doubting not just my memory, but my perception. To feel safe, I began keeping notes. Nothing dramatic, just little things. Dates, conversations, things we agreed on. I told myself it was practical, but somehow the notes always disappeared. Files corrupted, drafts gone, messages missing entire threads. She shrugged when I mentioned it. "Technology is unreliable," she said. "You know that." I started taking screenshots, backing things up. But even those vanished. It felt impossible. But it kept happening. That's when she suggested therapy, not for us, for me. She framed it as support. "I think you've been dissociating," she said carefully. "I want you to feel better." The therapist was kind, calm, professional. She listened, nodded, asked thoughtful questions. Questions that subtly framed me as unstable. How often do you question your own memory? Have you experienced confusion before this relationship? Do you ever feel disconnected from reality? I tried to explain what was happening, but without evidence it sounded paranoid. I later discovered my girlfriend had emailed the therapist beforehand, privately, context, concerns, her version of events. By the third session, I was being treated gently, compassionately, as the unreliable narrator of my own life. My sense of reality began to erode. I stopped trusting my emotions. If I felt upset, she guided me toward another explanation. "You're projecting. You're misinterpreting. That's not what you're actually feeling." If I felt confident, she reminded me of past mistakes. "Remember what happened last time you trusted your instincts?" Slowly, my inner voice grew quieter. Why think something if she already knew better? She was never cruel. That's the part people don't understand. She was precise. She knew exactly when to affirm me and exactly when to destabilize me. Too much validation would make me independent. Too little would make me suspicious. She kept me balanced on doubt. The moment everything snapped didn't come during a fight. It came in silence. We were sitting together, doing nothing. No TV, no music, just quiet. I was thinking about leaving. Not planning, not deciding, just imagining. She turned to me and said, "You'd never survive without me." Her tone was neutral, observational, like stating the weather. I froze. I asked how she knew what I was thinking. She smiled. Not warmly, not cruelly, precisely. "I've trained you," she said. "You think in patterns now." That night I didn't sleep. I waited until she did. Then I searched her laptop. What I found wasn't evidence of cheating or secret messages. It was worse. Folders, organized, labeled. My name. Inside were journals, detailed psychological profiles of me, my triggers, my fears, my attachment style, my compliance thresholds, notes about which phrases made me doubt myself, which tones made me anxious, which behaviors increased my dependency, charts, timelines, observations written like a case study. I wasn't her partner, I was her project. There were entries about moments I remembered feeling confused, explained clinically from her perspective. There were predictions, accurate ones. How long it would take me to apologize, when I'd start questioning myself, how likely I was to leave, and how likely I was to return. I closed the laptop and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Clarity. Cold, sharp, terrifying clarity. I left the next morning. No confrontation, no explanation. I knew if I spoke, she'd find a way inside the conversation. She didn't chase me. That should have scared me more than it did. Weeks later, she sent one message. "You'll come back." They always do. I never did, but even now, years later, I pause before trusting my own thoughts. I double-check my memories. I hesitate before making decisions. I question whether my feelings are real or learned. Because once, someone lived inside my mind and rearranged the furniture. Quietly, methodically, so that even after they leave, nothing is quite where you remember it being. He fell in love with me when I was at my lowest. People like to romanticize that. They call it devotion, loyalty, seeing beauty in someone's darkness. But there is a difference between loving someone through their pain and loving them because of it. I didn't know that then. I was grieving. Not loudly, not dramatically, and quietly. The kind of grief that empties rooms instead of filling them. I had lost things I couldn't explain without feeling embarrassed for still hurting. I was isolated, emotionally raw, unsure of who I was without the version of myself that had existed before everything fell apart. And he appeared like stability. He didn't rush me, didn't pressure me to be positive, didn't tell me to move on. He listened. He asked gentle questions, remembered details, sat with me in silence without trying to fix anything. When I cried, he didn't look uncomfortable. When I doubted myself, he reassured me. When I felt small, he made space for me. It felt like safety. It felt like someone choosing me when I had nothing impressive to offer. He encouraged me to talk about my pain, to open old wounds, to revisit memories I was trying to survive, not analyze. "Let it out," he'd say softly. "Don't hold it in. I want to know all of you." I thought he was helping me heal. What I didn't notice was when he wasn't there. On days when I felt lighter, when I laughed more easily, when I spoke about future plans instead of past losses, on days when I felt competent, capable, almost myself again. Those days, he became distant, not cruel, just unavailable. Texts came slower. Conversations felt thinner. His attention drifted. I told myself he was busy, that I was being needy, that love doesn't mean constant presence. But then something strange happened. The moment I fell apart again, truly fell apart, he returned, fully attentive, present, loving in a way that felt almost intimate in its intensity. When I cried, he held me like I was fragile glass. When I doubted myself, he spoke with certainty. When I collapsed inward, he wrapped himself around the pieces, and somewhere deep inside me, a connection formed. Being broken kept him close. I didn't decide to stay broken. It happened quietly, subconsciously. I learned which version of myself brought warmth and which brought distance. When I spoke about therapy, he frowned slightly. "Why relive pain when you have me?" he asked. "I'm right here." When friends invited me out, he looked concerned. "They don't really understand you," he said. "They want the old you. I love you as you are." When I talked about growth, new goals, new routines, new strength, his voice softened with something like sadness. "You're changing," he said. "I miss the old you. The old me, the one who cried easily, the one who doubted herself, the one who leaned on him to feel real. He never said, 'Don't get better.' He didn't have to." Every step toward healing came with subtle resistance, a sigh, a shift in tone, a comment about how distant I seemed lately, and every relapse into sadness was met with closeness, affection, reassurance. I didn't realize I was being conditioned. Pain became intimacy. Strength became separation. I stopped talking about things that made me feel capable. I lingered longer in sadness. I shared my insecurities more than my hopes. I told myself I was being honest. What I was really doing was staying accessible. The relationship revolved around my wounds. If I was hurting, or we were connected. If I was healing, we were drifting. It took a long time for that pattern to feel wrong. Because he wasn't cruel, he didn't insult me, he didn't belittle me, he didn't threaten me. He simply needed me to need him. The night everything shifted, I didn't confront him in anger. I was calm. I told him I wanted to get better, not feel better. Better. Therapy. Independence. A future that wasn't centered on survival. I watched his face change, just slightly. Fear flickered there before he could hide it. "If you heal," he said quietly, "you won't need me anymore." He said it like a confession. And suddenly everything made sense. He didn't love me. He loved my dependence. He loved being essential. He loved being the answer to pain I was never allowed to outgrow. I saw then that his patience wasn't endless. It was strategic. As long as I stayed fragile, I stayed close. As long as I doubted myself, I relied on him. As long as I believed I was broken, he had a role. When I ended things, I expected anger, or pleading, or guilt. He did none of that. He looked resigned, almost gentle. "I hope you stay broken enough to remember me," he said. It wasn't a threat, it was a wish. Healing took years, not because I missed him, but because I had to unlearn the idea that love is proven through suffering. I had to relearn what it felt like to be supported without being diminished, to be loved without being needed, to be strong without being abandoned. Some people don't want to grow with you. They want to be your shelter forever, even if the storm is past. Because control is easiest when someone believes they are unlovable without it. And real love doesn't need you to stay broken, to stay close. People often think abuse is loud. They imagine shouting, slamming doors, raised voices, and broken objects. They imagine something obvious enough that you'd know to leave. But some of the most destructive relationships are quiet. So quiet that you don't realize anything is wrong until your inner world has already gone silent. She never yelled. Not once in the 3 years we were together. No screaming, no insults, no threats. If anything, she was calm to the point of being unsettling. That was her greatest weapon. From the outside, she was flawless, intelligent, articulate, emotionally literate. She volunteered on weekends, remembered birthdays, asked thoughtful questions. She spoke softly and listened with what looked like genuine interest. People trusted her instinctively. Friends would say things like, "She's so grounded. She's so mature. You're lucky. She really understands people." Including me. Especially me. In the beginning, her calm felt like safety. I'd come from relationships filled with volatility, arguments that spiraled, emotions that exploded, words that couldn't be taken back. With her, everything felt measured, controlled, adult. When disagreements came up, she didn't argue. She paused, tilted her head slightly, and said, "That's interesting. Why would you think that?" Not what made me think that, why I would. At first, I thought she was just curious, intellectually engaged. But her questions always carried a subtle implication that my opinions weren't wrong, just strange. Like they required explanation, defense, justification. Over time, I noticed a pattern. My perspectives were never met with disagreement. They were met with examination. Conversation stopped feeling like exchange and started feeling like assessment. She never said, "You're wrong." She said, "I'm curious where that comes from." She never said, "That's irrational." She said, "That seems emotionally driven." And every time I felt myself shrink slightly. When I was upset, she didn't comfort me. She observed me. Her tone remained neutral, almost clinical. "I notice you get emotional when you feel criticized," she'd say calmly. "That's something you might want to work on." Not we might want to work on, me. My reactions became data points. My feelings became behaviors. My pain became something to be corrected. Arguments ended with me apologizing, not because I'd done something wrong, but because I was made to feel that having emotions was the real issue. She framed everything as self-improvement, as growth, as maturity. And because she never raised her voice, I couldn't point to anything concrete. There was no moment I could say, "This is abuse." Only a growing sense that I was constantly being adjusted, fine-tuned, managed. She remembered everything, every mistake I'd ever admitted, every insecurity I'd shared in moments of vulnerability, every fear I thought I was confessing in safety. She stored them carefully, and when the timing was right, she brought them out. Not aggressively, gently. "I'm not judging," she'd say. "I'm just noticing patterns." She'd connect dots between moments years apart, reframe my intentions, reinterpret my emotions. And because she spoke so calmly, so reasonably, I believed her. I started editing myself. I filtered my words, softened my tone, swallowed reactions before they reached my mouth. Anger made her distant. Sadness made her analytical. Only calm compliance kept the peace. The scariest part wasn't that I felt controlled. It was that I felt educated, like she knew something about me that I didn't. Like resistance would only prove her right. The first time I truly realized how deep it had gone was at a dinner with friends. Someone asked me a simple question, nothing serious, nothing emotional, just my opinion. I opened my mouth and froze. My first instinct wasn't to answer, it was to look at her. She noticed. She smiled. Not approvingly, expectantly, as if waiting to see which version of me would speak. That moment shattered something inside me. Later that night, I confronted her. Not angrily, not dramatically. I told her I felt watched, analyzed, reduced. She listened carefully, nodded slowly, let me finish. Then she said, "I think you're projecting unresolved issues onto me." She paused, then added, "But I'll stay patient while you work through that." That was the moment I understood. She didn't see me as an equal. She saw me as a system to be regulated, a set of emotional responses to be optimized. I wasn't a partner, I was a problem set. I left quietly, no fight, no explanation, just absence. She sent one message. "I hope one day you learn emotional regulation." Years have passed, I've rebuilt my life. But sometimes I still hesitate before reacting. I still question whether my feelings are valid or just unprocessed triggers. Because once, someone convinced me that emotions were flaws and silence was maturity.